Hi, my name is Torbjørn, and I'm your teacher.
And my name is Martin, and I'm your student.
You're listening to Hidden by Design, a podcast about design for ordinary people, I guess.
Are you calling me ordinary?
For everyone. A podcast about design for everyone. We believe that the most pleasurable and best design is the design you don't see. That's why it's called Hidden by Design. And the kind of design that works without you noticing. Typically, if you notice that you don't notice the design, that's when you will notice that it's just a nice experience. Everything we say in the show is our own opinion and interpretation of current knowledge and how the trends are and what's happening. And it's what we understand now. We might be right, we might be wrong, but it doesn't really matter. If you think we're wrong and you want to challenge what we're talking about or what we're saying or what I'm teaching, then just write us. Because we hope to become better designers and smarter people and to use this in our everyday life. Thank you for listening. Never make predictions, especially about the future. My name is Torbjørn, and I'm a designer. I have a small game company that I run, where I also do design. And I'm accompanied today by Martin, who I'm attempting to, I guess, to teach about design.
I haven't had a teacher for about 25 years, so
I promise I won't be strict.
Well, I quite like that, so
All right, then I'll be the strict teacher. So, Martin, will you introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Martin Wiskin, and I'm a voiceover artist, and I'm part of the Polyspice team. And yeah, I'm here because I know nothing about design, or seemingly know nothing about design. We've had a chat about this last week, and it appears that I did know about design, but didn't know that I knew about design. I hope that makes sense.
Exactly. Well, hopefully after this episode, it will be making sense too, because design is everywhere and it's in everything. And I think, today's episode, which is just what is design, is going to be talking about the specific bits about everywhere. It's like design is everywhere. The quote of today, which is never make predictions, especially about the future, is the exact opposite of what design is. It's a dude called Casy Stengel, which I have no idea who is.
Same.
It's just a quote. It's a quote I found on the internet, which is you find stuff there.
Could be a complete nobody.
Exactly. The other one was from a guy called Yogi Berra, I guess. So yeah. So I think, we kind of covered, it's not that difficult. Like the core or the big concept of what design is planning ahead or predicting the future. And there's really not much more to it. And so as a designer, really you have a lot of tools that you can work with in order to trying to plan ahead and predicting the future. And typically you will do that with, either shaping the path that a user, or we call it an actor, and I'm going to explain that in a minute. But someone using an object or like a designed thing is, we create, as a designer, you create a decision architecture. You plan ahead by saying, all right, the user will do this at this point, and that will make them understand that then they can do this at the next stage. So, if we want to advance it a little bit, like make it a little bit more advanced in terms of planning ahead, then one of the tools that we have as designers is that the knowledge that in order to do that, there's a relationship between an actor, which is, an actor can be a lot of things. It can be an audience, or it can be an individual. The actor is the person or the persons that you're trying to get to do something. And so the actor have a...
Could it be an animal?
It could be an animal. It absolutely could be an animal.
Trying to think of things that weren't humans that might have to react to something.
Exactly. So it's, the actor can be anything. It could also be a machine. And so can the object. So you have this, relationship between an actor and an object. And, the object could also be anything. It can be a speech, or it can be, an emotion or anything, but you kind of react to that object. And the relationship between the actor and the object is design. And so typically you will have the actor and an object in an environment. And so the understanding of the environment in relation to myself, if we just take the simple model and say an actor is a person, then that person is an environment, and I understand myself in this environment, which makes me capable of understanding my relationship with the object that I as a designer is creating. This is me trying to make it very, very simple, but does it make sense?
Yes.
That you have these three, the environment that you're in, and the actor and the object. And then you make that decision architecture between the actor and the object. You create decisions that I have to make in order to go. So if you put an animal as an actor in a maze, which is the object, but also the environment, you can make them, follow a specific path. If you don't make any junctions, you will just make them go from one end to the other. And so that's the design, right? So a thing that the people generally understand is computers, right? When you're a programmer or a developer, what you do is typically make a computer do something. So in many ways, you're designing for a robot or a computer. And so here is, as a designer, you really have to keep your tongue straight, or I don't know, is there an English expression? In Denmark, you have this, keep your tongue straight means, look ahead and focus.
Yeah, it would be, I don't know. I guess the negative way of saying it would be tunnel vision. So you're just looking in one direction.
Yes. Yeah, but here you have to focus, because when you are programming a computer, you do this by making logical instructions, right? You type down and it's like with a computer, you're also trying to predict the future, and you're making logical arguments. So instructions to the computer is, if this happened, then do this. If this happens, then do that, right? So in many ways, when you're programming a computer, you're trying to predict what's going to happen, and then you're telling the computer how to react to these instructions, like these environmental changes, right? With a human, you are also programming humans. But instead of logical instructions, you use emotional instructions. So path of the decision architecture is emotional instructions in this is how you behave, because most of the behavior of a human being comes from emotions, right? If you're angry, you will lash out, or you'll be frustrated, or you're like happy. All of these small emotions kind of dictates how you behave.
So this is where, when we were chatting before, that I felt most sort of bonded to this part, because when you started talking about humans and how it's tied to emotion, then being a voice actor, one of the first things we have to ask about every script we do is, how do we want the audience to feel? And of course, that's all to do with emotions, and that's exactly what you're saying here. So this bit I'm getting.
And that is a really, really, really good question, right? So because making people feel is making people act. And you will see this from a lot of different commercials and a lot of different things that you observe in everyday life, is this emotional instruction. Like, if you can make a person feel, you can make them act. And so typically, when someone talks about emotional instructions or emotions in general, you get this feeling that these are big emotions, right? It's like anger or a tantrum, or it's like someone throws a fit or is frustrated so that they don't know what to do with themselves. But these are micro instructions or micro emotions. So it's a very, very tiny, I feel a little bit good, or I feel, connected to this person I see a picture of, right?
And sometimes it could be that they don't even realize that it's happening. It's just a natural thing, especially if they're immersed in what they're doing.
Exactly. Right. So for example, you will see a picture of a person smiling, and that person is relatable. So typically you will pick your audience and you will find a person that you somehow, either by the way that they dress or the way that they look, it's like, it's a male or a female, and you will relate to that person on the picture. And then you will see the person smiling, and that triggers a micro emotion inside of you. And so that makes you act upon that picture because you want to be with that person, or you want to do something with that person, not your, cognitive thinking part of the brain, but the lizard, the old part of the brain kind of reacts to this. And so most of all of our action comes from that part of the brain. There's a guy called Kahneman who split it up into two, the brain into two, the reflective part and the automatic part. And I want to talk about that in a later episode because that's really digging into, behavioral. It's like how we behave as human beings, but also how animals behave. And then, robots is a little bit different, but it's kind of the same principles, is that you try to do this, prediction of the future. But I guess that's more or less it, right? If we have to just stay on the very high level of what design is, we end up with, that design is planning ahead by making people do or behave in a specific way or a certain way, right? We make them do things. And so I'm going to touch just lightly here in the end on this theoretic part about, it sounds now, once I'm done with this, that what we are really doing as designers is just manipulating people. And so typically manipulating people is a very negative, imbued, I don't know if imbued is the right word. It's like, it's a negative word. It tells a negative story. And obviously, some designers do manipulate people. I like to say that it's like a good designer guides people. And so I think there's something called dark design patterns, and there's another term that's called nudging, which is making, small micro nudges in a direction so that in the end, it's basically the decision architecture, right? It's like nudging people in a specific direction, and in the end, they make the decision that you want them to do. And so the difference between, just design and dark design patterns is that with design, you want to make people's life better, right? So you're nudging them, you're putting them in a direction where the life of that actor gets better. Whereas dark design patterns, you want to make your life or your company's life or, a cause. So you're not in it for the individual who you are designing for. You want them to make something or take actions that leads them to do something that's not desirable for them, but for you.
There was something that you said about manipulating people and guiding people, and there's something that I do when I meet businesses. I've got a little pitch that I do, and one of the things that I say in there is one of the things I do is I control consumers' minds without them knowing by using my voice, and that feeds in. In terms of other design, people just accept, don't they? It's just there. It happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's back to the smiling person or the friendly voice or anything that makes you think, that is something I would like to follow. And then there's the other one where, companies use specific techniques to make you pay a higher rate, or there's a technique called the decoy effect. And I believe that everyone sees this all the time. So the mind works in the way where any number you see, it's It's like we can't make decision or we don't understand thing unless it's in relation to something else. So everything we see and experience is based on the relationship we have with some other experience we had. So a trick here is to either make a very high or very low number. And it doesn't have to be related to what you're going to see next. It just sets an anchor of your perception of the next thing. So if you write, 1 million people do this thing, and then the next screen will be, and here's the pricing, then it feels like in the deep part of the brain, it feels like a lower number than it really is, because you put it in relation to the big number that you just saw.
Oh, okay.
Then they take it even further, and they go like, you have the free option here, and then you have the pro option here, and then you have the small business option in the middle. And that's called the decoy effect, where they set the high number of the professional so high and the low number, like the free version or the very cheap version, so low, so that you kind of have this gap in between. And then the one that they really want you, which is the one that typically gets like the best offer, it's like a little mark. And they put it closer to the high offer because but then it feels like, all right, the high offer is giving me all of these features, but only these two are different from the one that's a little bit lower. So that's obviously a better choice. So it feels like it's cheaper while it's actually really expensive. And they get you to pay a higher rate by doing this decoy thing. You see this with ice cream as well.
That's the more relatable topic.
Yes. So you have a small ice cream and you have the big ice cream, and then you have the medium ice cream. And the medium ice cream is always just a little bit cheaper than the big one, but almost as big. And so you kind of choose that.
Oh, I'm going to notice this next time I go to the ice cream parlor.
Yeah, exactly. Like, the decoy effect is just used everywhere. If you have 3 choices, look at the prices and you will see that they want you to do something. It's a dark design pattern. They do this to trick you into paying more money.
Well, hopefully, this is educating people and to open their eyes to these things.
I hope so. That was actually the hope of doing this. I don't know, like I have an example of a car and how a designer and an engineer kind of work differently. Because typically, as we talked about, an engineer typically, designs or program computers. But engineers also do stuff. It's like when designing a car, it's really interesting. So my example with the car is an example where typically there's an overlap. And as a designer, it's like very important to understand all of the things that happens in general and understand the system set you're designing for. It's like both the environment, which would be the car, and the interior of the car, and that environment that the actor, which is the driver, is going to sit in, and then the object. So let's just imagine that we designed a car, we made a car, and the brakes, it doesn't have any brakes, right? Somehow we forgot to add the brakes. So now we have a problem. All of the product managers are now investigating the market, and they see there's an overwhelming need from people who's asking, can we please make the car stop, right? It's like, it's really great that the car can go, but we also need it to stop once in a while, right? It's, it makes turning corners really difficult when you're at high speed velocity, right? And also respecting red lights is also a problem. So the designer and the engineer sits down and they talk together about, all right, how are we going to do this? So what the engineer will do is they will go into this with a functional mindset, right? They need to make the brakes work. They need to make the brakes work so that we can stop the car. And the designer solves the same problem, but from an emotional mindset, right? So they think about how can we make the driver trust the brakes, and how can we make the brakes do as the actor expected to. right? So there's this tension of friction between the engineer and the designer because both of them wants to solve the problem, and they have, two different approaches to it, which makes everything very strong if you can, use that to your advantage. So one of the things that the designer will do is they would talk to users and they would try to understand the mindset of that user and say, all right, we don't need the car to stop, right? So a button that stops the car is not what the user wants, right? Even though, and the engineer will go, well, we understand that if you can't brake, you will drive into houses or trees, or it's like accident will happen. So we need something that's reliable and that will work every time, and something that can be trusted. And so the combination of feeling that I can trust and that I can actually trust. So here's where the design work, where a lot of people get confused, because the design work actually starts way before the brakes, right? So there's a desire that if we make a brake pedal, the more I push the pedal, the more it will brake, right? So I can control the force. That's kind of engineer design thing. Where the designer comes into place, and this is like, as a kid, I remember hearing this, like someone says, at BMW, or it's like these other Volkswagen, they have a person whose only job is to make the sound the door makes when it shuts sound just right. And in our mind, as kids, we were just like, wow, that sounds stupid. Why would you ever do that? And the reason you want to do that is that sound, kind of, if we talk about decision architecture, that sound is the first step in making the user understand that this is a solid car that I can trust. The interior design is like, how does it feel when I sit in the car? Does it feel kind of, plasticky, or does it feel solid? It makes me trust the car, and it makes me trust the brakes, right? If I get into a car where the door is like, it feels like it's gonna fall off, and when I touch the gas pedal, it's kind of loose, a little bit loose, right? And the brakes is the same, right? They're not attached properly. Like, it feels that they are not attached properly. And there's a little bit too much leeway in the steering wheel and all of these things, right? That makes me trust it less. So now I will drive a little bit different because I don't trust the car, and I don't trust that the brakes will work if I hit them.
So it's all about the bigger picture of the whole thing of the car than just working on those brakes. It starts right at the beginning.
Yeah. Because as designers, we understand that decision at that moment relies on all of the other things and how the environment around you, right? So the environment is the car, which makes you trust that the object, which is the brakes, will work as intended. I don't know, like this. I think this is a good example also to understand the difference between, engineering and design, because they're typically mixed together a little bit. But I don't know. Do you have any more questions?
There was one thing that you summarized it in the middle of the episode, I think, when you said, and I wrote this down specifically because I thought it was a really good quote. Design is planning ahead by making people do or behave in a specific way. And that's so plain to me. And also, like I've said, because of what I do, that's what I do. I make people behave in a certain way. Like I try with my voice, and if it's a commercial, like the example you used, you try and make them react or do something or feel something. It doesn't even need to be to go and buy a product. You could make them remember something or just build association with a brand. And yeah, that totally just summed it up for me.
Oh, that's really nice. Yeah, so design is planning ahead by making people do or behave in a specific way. Yeah, maybe that's a good headline.
And maybe that's a good place to wrap up as well.
So that is design. So I guess in the next episode, I want to talk about something called affordances or affordance.
I have literally no idea what that is.
No.
No. So I was just going to say, I think there'll be more questions next episode.
Yes, absolutely. So I wanted to start, like, I think we should start out a little bit simple and just get the groundworks kind of in place. So I talked about some of the tools, and I think the next couple of episodes will be about some of the tools we have as designers. And one of these tools, or one of these understandings that we have about things, is something called affordances. And it's very interesting.
Cool. I look forward to it. Well, thank you, teacher.
Thank you for being a very good pupil. That concludes it.
Cool. Well, see you next time.
See you next time.